Almost 5 months after he was found guilty of committing one of the largest white-collar crimes in history, Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to forfeit more than $11 billion.
Prosecutors call SBF's crime historic, involving more than 1 million victims. And the sentencing marks the final chapter in a dramatic collapse. He addressed the court this morning and apologized about what happened.
The fall of FTX is considered the low point for the embattled crypto industry, and Bloomberg News reporting says that SBF's rise appeared to rely on tricking customers, investors, and banks almost from the very beginning.
The crypto industry, though, has been able to brush off this high-profile fall from grace, with Bitcoin sitting near a record high and institutional firms connected to the recent approval of spot Bitcoin ETFs.
Over the next hour, we will dig into this sentencing, SBF's legacy, regulation, and where crypto goes from here. First, here's what our guests have had to say about the saga.
It's just old-fashioned fraud.
It's really a story of a crook, not a story of crypto.
FTX, which definitely have completely changed the way diligence is done.
We suffered a lot of damage to trust in the end of 2022. And getting that behind us is a good thing, period.
We didn't need new legislation or policy or rulemaking or law or anything to find him guilty of one of the oldest crimes in the books, fraud, right? And so to that extent, I think that is done and dusted.
The industry's rebounded, it's accelerated regulation in those conversations, and the industry's in a much better place. So I think that there's going to be a pre-FTX world and a post-FTX world, and I think those in the industry are excited for the post-FTX world and to move forward from the event.
There are good players and bad players like any other industry, but that doesn't take away the technology behind it.
What I'm hopeful for here is that we see that this is just a bad actor who unfortunately was playing in a new sandbox, and we don't want to paint the industry with that type of a brush.
Excited to move forward and find appropriate regulation for this space.
Live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Tim Stenevec. Welcome to a special edition of Bloomberg Crypto.
And let's get right to the courthouse now in downtown Manhattan. Bloomberg Big Taste podcast host David Gura is there. And Bloomberg's Allison Verspril, who covers crypto regulation for us, joins us now from Washington. David, let's start with you because you've been covering this case from the beginning. Where does 25 years fall in between what the defense wanted and what the prosecution was arguing for?
Well, the judge said very early on in the hearing today that he was going to reject the guidelines that were put forward, the prosecution, the sentencing guidelines of 110 years. He said that was too many, but he didn't want to diminish the crimes that were committed by Sam Bankman-Fried. Said that in the context of what the prosecution wanted as well. So this is 25 years. A substantial amount of money is going to be seized as well, so much money that remains. So it's a serious crime. And so what we were kind of looking at today was where would Sam Bankman-Fried's sentence fit in the pantheon of fraudsters who have been prosecuted in this country before. At one extreme was Bernie Madoff, who was sentenced to 150 years. At the other extreme was Michael Milken, who got just a handful of years. That's in line with what the defense was hoping for, 6.5 years or fewer. So it's a strong sentence. It's a severe sentence. I don't want to diminish that at all. And the judge didn't want to as well. He kind of walked the courtroom through his thinking on sort of what this sentence needed to do. It needed to be punitive. It needed to punish Sam Bankman-Fried for the crimes that he committed. But it also needed to send a message to other fraudsters, other people, yes, in crypto, but in finance more broadly. We will see where Sam Bankman-Fried ends up after this. Following the sentencing, the judge said he would recommend that Sam Bankman-Fried be remanded to a prison in the San Francisco Bay Area, near to where he grew up, close to the Stanford University campus and where his parents still live. They're both on the faculty at Stanford Law School. And he said that he didn't think that there would be a need for a kind of maximum security prison for Sam Bankman-Fried in light of what we know of him and how he has comported himself in his short life. He's 32. He just celebrated his 32nd birthday in jail, the second birthday that he has marked in jail since all of this began.
Hey, Allison Verspril, I want to bring you in here and have you weigh in on something that David just mentioned. You cover crypto regulation from Washington, D.C. How do you think this sentencing, 25 years and forfeiting $11 billion, will reverberate throughout the community, and what message does it send to those right now who are facing charges?
So, I think from the perspective of legislation and regulation, the extent of these crimes has already been well known, right? So there have been actions after 2022, there was sort of an uptick in enforcement actions. We saw some activity on the Hill and writing new rules. Obviously nothing that's been enacted, but there was there were a lot of hearings being had. So I don't think it changes things from that perspective. But I think what it does send is a warning shot to other individuals who have been charged criminally in the U.S. I'm thinking of, Do Kwon, for instance, from Terraform Labs. So I think that what the message they should take away from this is that, they will be held accountable and, the sentence could be severe.
David, we're focusing on the 25 years in prison, which obviously is a huge part of the sentence. But another part of the sentence is forfeiting $11 billion. What do we know about the money that Sam Bankman-Fried has access to right now and that part of what the judge said?
I think this is a great mystery, and it's also something that was kind of dealt with as folly in the sentencing memo that we got from the defense. They kind of said that this would be superfluous to have a seizure or forfeiture of this size just in light of what's happened here. It's a great mystery, sort of who's paying for Sam Bankman-Fried's legal counsel. He's switched legal teams. All of this is very expensive. We don't really have a whole lot of insight into his finances currently. And part of today's hearing centered on this pre-sentencing report, which included presumably a lot of financial information to which we have no insight. It's not going to be made public. But yeah, I would say that the attitude that we have seen from the defense is that this is another blow to the defendant, to Sam Bankman-Fried. But again, his circumstances are kind of opaque, and it's unlikely that he would be able to come up with this kind of money now, of course.
And Allison, before we let you go, of course, it seems like the defense is really trying to paint Sam Bankman-Fried as really this kind-hearted math nerd who didn't have malicious intent. It seems as though that really didn't hold a lot of water with the judge, though.
No, the judge was very clear that these were serious crimes. He called out the fact that Bankman-Fried didn't really admit or acknowledge actually committing crimes. While he did feel contrite about the losses that people have faced, he put a lot of blame on the bankruptcy estate and how that's been handled. And so it was clear that that didn't play very well with the judge. Also, what didn't seem to play well was the fact that, he and his defense were continuing to say that FTX was solvent when it filed for bankruptcy in November 2022, or that, the bankruptcy estate from the recovery process is recouping enough money so that there aren't going to be any losses. He definitely pushed back against that idea and the fact that, there's not any loss or harm to these victims. And it was something that we also saw from the victim who took the stand as well.
Bloomberg's Allison Verspril, who covers crypto regulation from Washington, D.C., also the host of the Bloomberg Big Take podcast, David Gura, down there just outside of the courthouse where Sam Bankman-Fried was just sentenced. We do now want to bring in Rebecca Mermelstein. She's a former federal prosecutor. Rebecca, good to have you on the program this afternoon. This Sam Bankman-Fried sentence just minutes ago, $11 billion, 25 years in prison. Your reaction to what Judge Kaplan said?
I'm surprised actually that it was so low. And I say that not because I think it should have been higher. I think I would have given him a lower sentence if I were the judge. But given how Judge Kaplan viewed him and some of the things he said throughout the pendency of the entire case, and then the things he said at the sentencing himself, I thought he was going to give the government what they asked for. So I think it was kind of a break for Sam Bankman-Fried.
Well, to that point, Rebecca, that you were surprised that it is so low. I mean, does the fact that he's a first-time white-collar committer of this crime, does that weigh in at all?
It definitely does weigh in. It weighs in a technical way, in the way that the recommended sentence is calculated in the guidelines themselves. And then, of course, it weighs in on the way the judge thinks about him. But I thought one of the things the government did that was most compelling in its presentation, in its written submission, was it had that chart where it showed other defendants, white-collar defendants, who had loss amounts that put them in the same category, and it showed the sentence they received. And those sentences were, typically in the 40 to 60-year range. And so the government, I thought, did a good job of saying to the judge, for fairness, to put this defendant in the right spectrum of other defendants, that's the right sentence. And those people also didn't have a criminal history. And so I think that it is already baked in some ways that he doesn't have a prior conviction. If he had had a prior conviction, he'd be much worse off, of course.
Hey, Rebecca, I'm really curious about how both the defense and the prosecution portrayed the personality of Sam Bankman-Fried, because both sides tried to use his personality to their own advantage. What did you make of that?
super interesting. I think that you saw the government weaponize the defense theory here. And so the defense tried to use his autism, his inability to experience happiness, his effective altruism that he was so committed to explain, if not justify, some of the actions he took and to cast him in a more sympathetic light. And what the government did was flip that coin on its head and say that's exactly why this defendant is so dangerous and why he needs to be not just punished, but incapacitated and incarcerated for a long enough period of time that he won't be able to commit future crimes. And that's a pretty unusual argument for the government to make in a white collar case, that someone needs to be fully incapacitated. So I thought the government did a very a clever job of turning that on its head. And of course, Judge Kaplan both credited the defendant's somewhat unusual personality, but also found that he was a danger and needed to be incapacitated. So I think ultimately it didn't do the work the defense was hoping.
And Rebecca, when it comes to the sentence, something that Tim and I were wondering about is how much of it he will actually serve. Because if you use the example of Elizabeth Holmes, for example, who he has been compared to, her sentence was for 11 years and 3 months, and already it's been reduced by about 2 years for good behavior. When it comes to this crime, this sentence, is there a minimum amount of time that he has to serve?
There is. So in the federal system, there is no longer parole. There hasn't been for a long time. And that means that the maximum benefit a defendant can get is 15% off for good time. So if you essentially have good behavior in prison, you'll have a 15% reduction in your sentence. But that's it. That's the maximum you can get. So 25 years, he's looking at serving plus minus about 21.
All right, Rebecca, really great to get your perspective here. Our thanks to Rebecca Mermelstein. She is partner at O'Mel Venny. Thank you so much. Now coming up, Sheila Warren from the Crypto Council for Innovation. She joins to discuss what's needed from regulators to prevent this from happening again.
Also, we're going to talk with Louis, who's buying up other claims from other victims of the FTX collapse and thinks that SBF actually deserved a second chance. This is Bloomberg.
He is going to, serve some time and deserves to. But I think it's good for the industry to move beyond that. I think we have. I think, the face of the industry in some weird way went from a little kid in Bermuda shorts to Larry Fink.
That was Mike Novogratz this week talking about how the face of crypto has dramatically changed just in the past year. For more on where the crypto industry goes from here, let's bring in Crypto Council for Innovation CEO Sheila Warren. Sheila, good to have you back with us on Bloomberg Crypto. Give us your reaction to 25 years from Judge Kaplan and $11 billion forfeited, the sentencing for Sam Bankman-Fried, which we just learned about in the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tim, for having me. I'm also surprised, like your last guest, about the relative lightness of the sentence, frankly. I did think we'd be more into the 40 to 50-year range. Just because of the sheer magnitude of the crime. And, I called this at one point a spectacular and ongoing implosion, because it didn't stop with just the misuse of customer deposits. It also continued with the perjury, with the witness tampering, with all these things. And just the sheer fact that Sam Bankman-Fried didn't really, at least to my knowledge, show any remorse until today, when he was really under the gun, at the last possible moment.
And so, Sheila, it's really interesting here. You think about what the industry felt like in November 2022 compared to now. Obviously, Bitcoin back at an all-time high. It seems like we are firmly out of this crypto winter. What do you think that the lasting impact of this entire episode has been on the crypto industry?
Well, I certainly hope that as we saw a lot of tourists and scam artists and others exit the space because they weren't able to make a quick, fast buck anymore, I hope that that continues. I hope that there is sufficient recognition that there are eyes on things that seem outlandish or unbelievable. Sam's claims about how much money he was just making over such a short period of time as an example. So my hope is that that continues. I also, as the market comes back, however, my there's always that danger, right? That you're going to get opportunists that come in that don't necessarily care about the core values of the technology and what can do, why it's so innovative and exciting, but are just in it to, engage in making a quick buck at someone else's expense. So I certainly hope we don't see a recurrence of that kind of behavior.
But Sheila, I'm curious about potential long-term consequences here. And in your view, if there was any damage or has been any damage as a result of what Sam Bankman-Fried did, what he was convicted of, and ultimate damage to the crypto industry.
Well, I think it's important to note, Tim, as I think others have said, that there were no new laws needed here. I mean, Sam was convicted on laws that have been on the books for a very, very, very long time, and he committed one of the oldest crimes in the book, namely fraud. And then, of course, adding on the perjury, the witness tampering, everything else that came along with that. And so there wasn't really much that could be done from the standpoint of new regulation that would have prevented this specific and particular behavior. And I think that most folks are pretty aware of that. So my view is that this really was not an indictment in any way about the crypto industry and how it ordinarily operates. It was about one individual who took advantage of a particular moment in time, quite frankly. But the other thing, Tim, I think we have to talk about very honestly is what it says about our society, because the reality, you mentioned Elizabeth Holmes, the reality is as a society, we do tend to valorize young people and give them a lot of credibility that isn't really deserved, frankly, when they make these, again, very outlandish claims about success in areas that have proven to be very difficult for everybody else. And we have to talk about that and think about what is it about our society that elevates some of these folks, and I think Sam was one of them, to a place where their status is almost unassailable and they can get away with things like this. That is something that is not about law or regulation. It's really about culture. And until that changes, I'm looking at the next place. I don't think it's going to be crypto, but there's going to be some other industry or space where some other person, right, rises with shaky ethics, let's say, or shaky moral values, rises to the top because they are again made out to be a wonderkin that can do no wrong. That's a problem.
Sheila, we have to continue this conversation soon. Really appreciate your time today. That, of course, is Crypto Council for Innovation CEO Sheila Warren. Now, coming up, why evidence from SBF's trial suggests fraud was built into FTX from the very beginning. This is Bloomberg. All right, let's talk now about the business operation that was FTX and how Sam Bankman-Fried armed his business with a cheat code of unlimited customer cash in order to make FTX look more successful than it actually was. Let's bring in now Bloomberg's David Gura and Zeke Faux. Zeke, of course, is the author of the book Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. David, take it away.
Katie, thanks so much. Zeke, you were in the courthouse behind me. We had a fascinating conversation about what you and Max Chafkin have uncovered. And going into today's sentencing, what the defense kept saying was fundamentally there is no loss. There is this argument that things went wrong, Sam Bankman-Fried made some mistakes, but fundamentally the business itself was sound. What did you and Max discover about that in the course of your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, Sam's been treating this like it's a kind of trump card. Even today, when he was speaking in his to the judge who's about to sentence him, he tried to say, hey, the money was never missing. And that totally disregards the evidence that's come out about FTX. And what we found was that really the fraud started very early on, within a few months of when they opened the exchange.
I wanted to ask you about what Sam Bankman-Fried said and didn't say. I think that there was a lot of speculation that because he didn't express much remorse during the course of the trial, if any, he didn't explicitly express remorse in the sentencing document, sentencing memo as well. He might do it today. And there was, correct me if I'm wrong, a sense that he might be headed in that direction at the start of his testimony today.
Yeah, I mean, he stood up. He seemed like he was ad-libbing, and he started addressing his former colleagues, something that he hadn't really talked about so much, the people close to him whose lives have been ruined by this. And he spoke about each of them and some of the great things that they had done running FTX or helping him build FTX. And it seemed like he might be saying he was sorry for doing something to undo that. The problem was he just can't cross the line of saying, I am sorry that I committed a crime, he always falls back on, I made mistakes were made, but the money's still there, the customers are going to get paid back, and it was an error in judgment, but he's not saying, I'm sorry that I committed crimes. And it's something that the judge cited before reading out the sentence.
Yeah, that passive voice of mistakes were made. I want to ask you about how the defense regarded the potential sentence as it was unfolding. So Mark Mukasey, a new lawyer for Sam Bankman-Fried, replacing Mark Cohen, who did represent him during the course of the trial. What did you make of the way that he presented him? There was, as I sort of read along, again, you were in the courthouse, a lot of familiar tropes. He's a math nerd. He has difficulty engaging with people. He has this ahedonia. He can't feel happiness. What did you make of how he was presented in the minute that we have left here?
It was a pretty moving speech about Sam's background, his childhood, and he had this punchy one-liner where he said that Sam wasn't, some sort of evil genius. He was a math nerd. He wasn't motivated by greed. He was motivated by numbers. But the government, when it was the prosecutor's turn to speak, totally flipped that on them and said, yeah, we weren't saying he was some kind of monster. We were saying he calculated the odds and decided the odds were in his favor to break the law, and that's why he committed these crimes.
30 seconds we have left. Just picking up on that, we heard from Nick Rose, the prosecutor. He said he stole $8 billion. He really wanted to emphasize that in the course of his closing remarks.
Yeah, he's saying that recovering the money is no defense. The fraud was taking this customer money, which again they started doing very early on, and spending it on speculative investments. Just if those investments paid off, it doesn't negate that the theft occurred.
Zeke Fox of Bloomberg News, a lot to credit you for. Your book, Number Go Up, your piece with Max Chafkin, Cheat Code, and your appearance, you and Max both, on the podcast, The Big Take, in which we talk about this, sort of the genesis of FTX and how cheating was there from the get-go. Toss back here to Tim at Bloomberg headquarters in New York.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's David Gura and Zeke Fox, both live at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan right now. And if you can't get enough of FTX coverage, do tune into the latest Bloomberg Big Take podcast with David and Zeke. It's all about this trial. Katie, I got to tell you, I've listened to it twice.
I am not surprised that you have done that. I have to say, it's really interesting from our guests so far that there seems to be surprised that the sentence was so low, in their words, 25 years.
Okay, so let's talk about that number. 25 years, he's in his late 50s. He's 32 right now, so he's in his late 50s when he gets out. He could get out in his early 50s if he does get out for good behavior. But that means, for a lot of people would argue, a lot of his working years are spent behind bars, and there's a low risk of recidivism there.
He's also got to come up with $11 billion. Of course, that was part of this as well, that he has to forfeit $11 billion in addition, of course, to that 25-year sentence. Much more coverage coming up. This is Bloomberg.
The cryptocurrency industry might be new. The players like Sam Bankman-Fried might be new. But this kind of fraud, this kind of corruption is as old as time, and we have no patience for it.
That was Manhattan U.S. Attorney Damian Williams speaking back in November when Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty. As we've been covering throughout the last hour, Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years in prison and told to forfeit $11 billion. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin, who's been reporting on the FTX saga for months. Max, good to have you with us. I want to talk a little bit about the DNA of FTX, because that's something that you spent a lot of time reporting on. What did you and Zeke Fox find, and what did prosecutors kind of agree with in terms of the way that FTX was set up?
So one of the interesting things about this case as it proceeded, obviously the trial was huge news. Sam Bankman-Fried himself was huge news. And there was kind of this conventional wisdom sort of settled in over the last 6 months or so. Sam Bankman-Fried is a guy who did something very wrong, but FTX, this cryptocurrency exchange, was actually a really, really good company that he just ruined through his fraud. And the closer Zeke, Fox, and I looked at this, the more wrong that seemed to me. This was a company that was broken essentially from the beginning. If you go back and look at testimony from trial, you have people saying essentially the intent of founding FTX by Sam Bankman-Fried was to take customer funds. They were papering over losses. The exchange only looked profitable. It was only profitable because they were using customer funds to fill the holes. And I think one of the reasons that's been memory hold, frankly, is that the crypto industry desperately wanted it to be true, because many companies were very bought into the idea that a cryptocurrency exchange like FTX would be very successful. And seeing it fall apart in this way, you would think would be a sign that of some difficulty in the industry. And instead, we've seen lots of players try to spin this as kind of a one-off thing. And I think it's worth asking questions about that.
And that, of course, is at exact odds with what the defense has been trying to portray, that really what happened here in their argument was that Sam Bankman-Fried basically got caught up, that basically this big collapse that you saw in Bitcoin prices, that he couldn't cover those losses. But you're saying, of course, this was written to the DNA.
Not only that, but that the gains since then, the fact that crypto markets have recovered so much, that that the bankruptcy lawyers now for FTX are saying that they're going to be able to return a significant percentage of funds to to the victims, that somehow vindicates this whole thing. And I think that's super problematic. I mean, one of the issues I think that gets people into trouble when they're talking about these assets that are extremely volatile, it's a thing that got Sam Bankman-Fried into trouble, is looking at the price and assuming that price, implies some inherent value, and that is not always true. We're talking about markets that are super volatile, that can be manipulated, where there are scams and so on, and we're kind of seeing this play out over and over again. And it's not just Sam Bankman-Fried who sort of wanted this to be true, but it's many of the FTX victims. I mean, when you read a lot of the statements, they think what went wrong here is that that they were forced to sell their cryptocurrency early, right? Some of them are actually very mad at John Ray, the bankruptcy, who's running the bankruptcy, for, sort of essentially forcing them to take their losses in US dollars rather than in crypto. They'd rather, be hodling right now and riding the market up even further.
Okay, well, speaking of that, Max, here we are, a long way from, in crypto terms, November of 2022. We're at near all-time highs for Bitcoin. We have some meme coins, for lack of a better term, moving higher. It's almost like this never happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're exactly where we were, in fact. In fact, many of these meme coins are the exact coins that were, riding high during Sam Bankman-Fried's, rise. Solana is one of the big gains. Of course, Solana is a coin that was very closely identified with Sam Bankman-Fried, a Sam coin, as they called it internally, because he owned such a big percentage and was so involved in kind of, encouraging people to buy it. So I think, to me, this does not bode well. Of course, there are lots of people who are very smart who look at this and say, yeah, everything is back to normal. We've gotten a bad actor out, and let's ride this wave as high as it'll take us, I suppose.
All right, Max, great reporting as always. Really appreciate your time. That is Bloomberg's Max Chafkin. Now let's get back to Bloomberg's David Gura outside the courthouse in downtown Manhattan, who's alongside Joshua Naftalis. He is former federal prosecutor. Josh, let's start with you here, because I just want your reaction basically to that 25-year sentence. Of course, that was what everyone was waiting for. What factors do you think went into Judge Kaplan's decision here?
Hi, thanks for having me. It was certainly a stiff sentence. I think Judge Kaplan was very thoughtful in crafting the sentence, in that he didn't follow what the government wanted, and he obviously didn't follow what the defense wanted. The reporting I've seen so far is that he was moved by a few things. One, that SBF lied when he took the stand. Two, that he tampered with witnesses. And three, that Bankman-Fried might reoffend. I'm sure he also said that he wanted to send a message to the crypto industry. I just wasn't in the room.
Well, Joshua, what does Sam Bankman-Fried do now over the next 25 years? The judge did say that he would be put in a prison close to his family in the San Francisco Bay Area. But what's life like for him over the next 25 years? What can he do in prison? What will he be able to do?
I mean, he will most likely be put in a minimum security prison or a camp, which isn't the most pleasant place to be, but it's not as bad as a maximum security prison. And he'll have a lot of time on his hands, obviously, to think, write, work on his appeal. But I would say it's obviously, a difficult time for him.
Josh, I want to ask you, if I could, just about an argument that it seemed like Judge Kaplan really dismembered at the start of this. And so you had the defense saying, essentially no harm, no foul. As Max Chafkin was talking about just a moment ago, this belief that assets have been recovered, people are going to be made mostly whole, if not entirely whole. He had kind of a very vivid example of like, it's like going to Vegas and using stolen money, then winning, you still stole the money. Could you talk a bit about that, just the way that Judge Kaplan kind of contextualized the fraud that took place here and why that's so important as we look ahead again through to bankruptcy as well?
Sure. So I think what Judge Kaplan was getting at is that what matters is the intended loss in imposing sentence. It doesn't matter that it may have worked out in the end that Mr. Ray has recovered a lot of the assets. What matters is when he was committing the fraud, the intent to steal $8+ billion. And Judge Kaplan said yes, and I don't buy your excuses.
And Joshua, I want to go back to that point you made about there's sort of a message being sent here when you consider this sentence 25 years in prison that it seems like the judge is trying to deter other bad actors who might pop up in the crypto space, especially as we see the whole industry really rally back to all-time highs.
Agreed. I think that comes back to what David said, which is what matters in sending a message with a sentence is that this was an $8 billion fraud. This wasn't a mistake that happened to work out in the end and people are going to get a lot of their money back. He was sending a message sort of to Wall Street, to crypto, to everyone that if you steal money, you will get a stiff sentence. And this is obviously a very stiff sentence for a white-collar defendant.
Well, Joshua, I want to go back to something that you said about what he will do while he is incarcerated over the next 25 years. You mentioned that he could spend time working on his appeal. Talk to us about the process there and what avenues SBF faces now to appeal his sentence.
Sure. So, I mean, SBF, as we know, changed lawyers. He has Mark Mukasey now, who's a great lawyer. But he may have a big uphill battle to fight on the appeal. Usually, the notice of appeal will be filed within 30 days 14 days of today. And he then has approximately 3 months to write the appeal, though he could ask for more time. And he's probably going to not throw the kitchen sink at the appeal, but pick the arguments that really are the best ones. And I would imagine one of the arguments he's going to make is that the sentence was just too harsh, because most white-collar defendants, other than a Bernie Madoff, isn't going to get 25 years, and whether that was a disproportionate sentence. Now, I don't think it was, to be clear, but I think that's an argument he will make.
Josh, a last question from me just about what you just mentioned, that being that he switched lawyers. He changed trains kind of halfway through all of this. And there's a sharp contrast between Mark Cohen, who was his lawyer throughout, and the performance that we saw today from Mark Mukasey, this new lawyer. How odd is it to have that happen, to switch lawyers before a sentencing like this? And I guess what I'm getting at is there's the appeals process, but there's also kind of regret perhaps about how the process unfolded. How does a defendant deal with that? There might not be something here that could win on appeal, but perhaps regret that maybe the lawyer you picked the first time around wasn't the one that could present the most compelling case to the court.
Sure. So, I mean, to be clear, I think Mark Cohen and Chris Everdell are amazing. They did everything they could. So I don't think that switching lawyers implies that they somehow did something wrong. This was an almost impossible case to win. And typically when a defendant gets convicted at trial, he either brings on appellate counsel or switches lawyers. The reason is you want a fresh set of eyes. There's also a certain exhaustion with the case. These guys were really slogging away for the better part of a year on this. And, you know, Mark is a vigorous advocate too, and you want some fresh blood to mix it up. I wouldn't read anything into the fact that you switch lawyers. There's a cottage industry of white-collar appellate lawyers who do quite well. You know, when someone loses a trial, they step in.
Well, there you have it. That's former federal prosecutor Joshua Naftalis and Bloomberg's David Gura, the host of the Big Take podcast. Thanks so much to both of you. Well, coming up, we're going to be joined by Louis. He's going to join to discuss his business buying up claims from FTX creditors. This is Bloomberg.
A lot of sympathy for the folks that were involved with FTX and Celsius and Voyager and other situations, and unfortunately, they were severely negatively affected by these bankruptcies. But I think there's an opportunity to galvanize the community off of that, and in particular, it's been public that we've been involved in trying to restart the FTX exchange. Whether or not that happens at this point, I think what is likely to happen is for us to do something with the FTX community.
And that was Figure Technologies CEO on Bloomberg Television earlier this month, talking about what he thinks is next for FTX. And let's keep that conversation going now with Louis. He is a co-founder of FTX Creditor, which he started with a former FTX executive. So far, it's bought up over 950 claims worth up to $20 million from victims of the FTX collapse. I'm pleased to say he joins us now. So, Louis, let's start simple here. Talk to us about what this business is and how it came to be.
Yeah, thanks. So our business is really simple. We try and offer high prices to small claimants. There's a big market out there for people with multi-million-dollar claims on FTX to sell their claim and, invest their money how they want to invest their money, no longer be stuck in the bankruptcy. There is not that market for small claimants. So our service provides that for small claimants. We will buy claims. Our minimum claim size is $2,500, and we will pay in a 30-minute call in USDC.
Louis, where did you get the funding to do this in the beginning? I mean, it takes capital to buy up these claims.
So when we started out with just our own capital, and then we raised some funds to do this. The IRRs are pretty attractive on a risk-adjusted basis. They're much smaller returns than just buying Bitcoin or buying Solana, of course. But we are not crypto traders. We're really distressed guys at heart, and so this is what we do.
And Louis, I'm curious about why you chose to team up with a former FTX executive in this venture. Of course, your partner was FTX's former head of product, and pessimists might look at that and say it seems like this former FTX executive could be seen as profiting off of victims' bankruptcy claims.
Well, let's not forget that all FTX employees were victims also. Some of them, trusted their life savings. They trusted everything to Sam and lost their careers, lost their savings. They're victims just like everybody else. What we wanted, I'm a distressed guy. I was looking for a team of super competent people that knew what they were doing. And that's why we created this partnership.
Help us understand the numbers here, Louis. What's a typical, or what's the average in the terms of what you've bought up? What's the average number of cents on the dollar that you've bought these claims for? And then how do you expect them to be reimbursed to you?
Well, what's important to understand as a concept is the petition date values. The bankruptcy prices the accounts based on what they were worth as of the petition date. So that was the 11th of November, 2022, when Bitcoin was trading at $16,000. Today, that number is significantly higher. And unfortunately, the bankruptcy court is not going to be returning Bitcoin to people, and they're going to be returning 100% of petition date values. This is new. We did not know this coming into it. We estimated much lower recoveries, but the rally in crypto assets has really helped that.
I'm also curious, though, about those market dynamics and how they factor into whether people are still selling their claims, because, of course, it's come out that a lot of these customers, they're likely going to be made whole. Are people still interested in selling their claims to you and potentially then flipping that back into Bitcoin?
That's what we see. We see a lot of people who want to get out. The most common emotion we get on a call is relief. The average claim size, to answer your previous question, is about $50,000. And those people just want to get stable coins and be able to have the freedom to operate with their money the way they want. We're paying rates sometimes in the 80 cents on the dollar. And these guys want to buy back Bitcoin or do whatever they want to do. Being stuck in a bankruptcy for another year is not the most appealing of things. And our offering is pretty compelling given how volatile cryptocurrency is, how fast we pay, we think it's a pretty compelling offering.
You're offering liquidity to people who may need that liquidity right now, even if it is for less than what their Bitcoin was worth or their crypto was worth at the time of the collapse of FTX. Give us an update on numbers here, Louis. How many claims have you bought up, and how much are those claims worth?
So we're nearing 1,000 claims. It doesn't sound like much, but it is a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous lift. We have more claims in absolute number of claims than the sum total of all other claim buyers. So we know that we're offering a compelling product. In terms of dollar amounts, that is around $60 million. Now, remember that a lot of claim holders had mega multi-million dollar claims, but most claimants had less than $10,000 on the platform.
Louis, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Louis Origny, co-founder of FTX Creditors, joining us this afternoon. Coming up, how the collapse of FTX is affecting the VC community that is interested in crypto. The lessons learned from SBF's fall. That's all next. This is Bloomberg. Well, venture capitalists raising funds to pour into startups are wary of Bitcoin's recent bull run as they fear a repeat of the 2022 crypto collapse. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Hannah Miller in San Francisco. Hannah, good to have you with us this afternoon. Give us an idea of the temperature of VC investing in crypto right now. Given that we are close to all-time highs for Bitcoin, we're seeing other meme coins high as well, and also that this is all coming in the shadow of a conviction and sentencing of Sam Bankman-Fried.
Well, I have to say things are really heating up when it comes to crypto venture capital. I have way too many deals to keep track of.
Wow.
Things are happening again. People are investing in anonymous founders, which was a big red flag prior to the crypto collapse. And with Bitcoin prices surging back, VCs are interested in startups that focus on Bitcoin, are building infrastructure for the crypto ecosystem. They're really excited about what lies ahead. So we're expecting to see a surge in venture funding for crypto startups for this quarter.
Hannah, what does due diligence look like on an anonymous founder?
Yeah, so it really depends on the venture firm. Some of them do require this founder to be doxxed and reveal their identity to, investors who are going to be on the cap table. Others are willing to play along and, keep that identity protected and anonymous.
Okay, I want to go back to the big news of the day. Sam Bankman-Fried sentenced to 25 years. $11 billion is what the judge says he must pay. Hannah, it also makes me think of the other characters involved, the other folks involved in this, some of whom have pleaded guilty already, including Caroline Ellis and Nishad Singh. You have others as well. What do we know about the fate of those folks who have pleaded guilty and did testify against SBF?
Yeah, so it's no surprise that their sentencing is coming after Sam Bankman-Fried's. Bankman-Fried's sentencing sort of sets the standard here. He is the main character in this collapse. So we'll see, what lies ahead for them. There is a May 1st sentencing date for Ryan Salem, who also pleaded guilty. The other dates are not publicly known at this time.
And Hannah, we only have about a minute left with you, but I want to go back to the fact that you are so busy right now writing about deals. Are these VCs crypto natives, so to speak, or are these more traditional VCs coming back to crypto?
It's a great question. It's definitely more crypto native VCs. They have to deploy capital in the crypto space, but we're still seeing strong interest from general players. A16Z is still very active, still doing deals, and still has a massive crypto war chest. After all, they raised a $4.5 billion fund for crypto investments.
All right, Bloomberg's Hannah Miller, thank you so much. Of course, we're wrapping up coverage here of what has been a historic day, Tim. Over the past hour, of course, we've learned 25 years in prison. Yeah, 57 years old is how old Sam Bankman-Fried could be when he gets out of prison. 52 years if he gets out early after serving 85% of that time. The big question I have is what an appeal looks like here and to what extent he could see that time reduced. Well, we'll have to do another crypto special when that time comes.
Okay.
But in the meantime, if you can't get enough FTX coverage, tune into the latest Bloomberg Big Take podcast with David Gura, which, of course, is all about this trial. But that does it for Bloomberg Crypto for now. We'll be back at noon New York time on Tuesday. This is Bloomberg.